This must be a joke. Liam Carter's voice was nothing but a cold, sharp edge slicing through the air. His piercing blue eyes locked onto the woman standing in front of him, her presence like a ghost from a past he had long buried. Emily Ross. The last person he ever expected to see at a charity gala in the heart of New York City. His whiskey glass trembled in his hand for a split second before he tightened his grip, reclaiming his usual composure. The dim lighting of the ballroom reflected, against the golden liquid, laughter and music blending into an irrelevant hum behind him. But everything else vanished the moment she stepped forward. "We need to talk, Liam, it's important." Her voice was steady, but he didn't miss the slight hesitation in her dark brown eyes. Emily always had a way of looking both defiant and vulnerable at the same time. Liam took a slow sip of his whiskey, never breaking eye contact. "After 2 years of complete silence, I don't think so." Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't back down. "This isn't about us. It's about my son." Her son. Liam froze for half a second before letting out a low, humorless laugh. "You can't be serious." Emily pulled out her phone and, without a word, held up a picture. Something inside Liam twisted. The boy had his eyes, the same damn shade of blue. The same expression. No, this was a coincidence, a trick. "This is ridiculous." He stepped closer, invading her space. The warmth of her body was so close, the faint floral scent of her skin hitting him like a wave of nostalgia. Memories he had long suppressed threatened to resurface. Emily didn't move, but her breathing turned shallow. "If you have any doubts, take a DNA test." Her voice was strong, but her lips were slightly parted, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt far too familiar. Liam tilted his head, bringing his lips close enough to brush against the shell of her ear. "Or maybe, Emily, you just missed what we used to do together." A shaky breath escaped her body betraying her before she snapped out of it and stepped back. "Don't you dare play games with me." The fire in her gaze sent a thrill through his veins. He remembered that look. He remembered the way she used to stare at him before completely surrendering. Liam smirked. "Fine. If you're so sure, then I'll take the damn test." Emily lifted her chin, her voice unwavering. "Perfect. Because when you see the truth, I want to watch you swallow every single one of your words." She turned around and walked away, leaving behind the scent of roses and unfinished business. Liam stood there, silent, his grip tightening around his glass. No, it couldn't be true. But deep down, for the first time in his life, he felt something foreign creep into his chest. Doubt. "Say that again." Liam Carter's voice was dangerously low, controlled. But the tension in his body was unmistakable. Emily Ross didn't flinch. She met his icy stare with one of her own, her pulse racing but her resolve firm. "You have a son, Liam." "His name is Noah." The silence between them stretched thick and suffocating. The sleek office at the top of his Manhattan high-rise, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and impeccable order, suddenly felt too small. Liam leaned against his dark mahogany desk, arms crossed over his chest, his sharp blue eyes scanning her face. "That's impossible." Emily exhaled sharply, then pulled out her phone again, swiping to another photo. Noah's face stared back at him, and for the first time, something inside Liam faltered. He clenched his jaw, the same eyes, the same slight frown. No, this wasn't happening." He let out a cold laugh, his smirk sharp as a blade. "How many other men were in your bed at the time, Emily?" Her head snapped back as if he'd slapped her. The flicker of hurt in her eyes was almost imperceptible, but he caught it. And for some goddamn reason it made his stomach clench. "You're an asshole, Liam," he didn't blink. "And you're a liar if you think I'm falling for this without proof." "That's why I want you to take a DNA test," she said, her voice tight but unwavering. "I want you to see the truth with your own eyes." Liam stayed silent, because if he doubted even for a second, his perfectly controlled world would start to crack. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he pushed off his desk and walked toward her. Emily held her ground, but the closer he got, the heavier the air became. Her body was rigid, her breathing shallow, but her lips parted slightly, as if she was already anticipating what would come next. "What do you really want from me, Emily?" he murmured, his voice dropping to a sinful rasp. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you came back into my life." Emily's jaw clenched. "If you think I came back for you, you're delusional." Liam let out a dark chuckle, tilting his head slightly, his lips hovering just a breath away from her ear. "Still lying to yourself, sweetheart?" She shuddered, but in a flash, she snapped back, placing both hands on his chest and shoving him away. "You're right, Liam, I haven't forgotten you." His smirk deepened until she added, "Because remembering what we did makes me sick." Something inside him twisted. He wasn't expecting that. Emily reached for the DNA test request form on his desk, pressing it hard against his chest. "You have two choices. You can write a check and disappear like the coward you are, or you can prove to me that you're not just another mistake in my life." Liam held her gaze, his grip tightening around the paper. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Liam ripped off the latex gloves and tossed them into the disposal bin, his movements sharp with irritation. "It's done." The doctor nodded, sealing the sample carefully. "The results will be available in a week." Liam barely acknowledged him. His focus had already shifted to the woman standing by the door, arms crossed over her chest, her body tense. Emily, her dark eyes locked onto his, unshaken. She was certain, and that certainty pissed him off. "Good," he muttered. "Now get out of my sight until I have those results." Emily didn't argue. She simply turned on her heel and walked away without a glance back. Liam clenched his jaw as the door clicked shut behind her. No, there was no way, but the doubt was already there. 6 days later, the waiting was driving him insane. Liam threw himself into his work, into mindless distractions, into women who never stayed past the night. Nothing helped, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw those damn blue eyes staring back at him. Noah. And against every logical instinct, he found himself parked outside a small playground uptown, watching from a distance. He spotted her first. Emily sat on a wooden bench, her arms resting loosely on her lap, her gaze fixed on a little boy playing in the grass. Liam's stomach twisted. Noah. The boy chased after a ball, his tiny legs stumbling slightly before he fell onto his knees. Emily immediately tensed, as if about to rush toward him, but Noah, with a determined little frown, stood up on his own and dusted off his jeans like nothing had happened. Liam gripped the steering wheel. That was his attitude. A sharp knock on the window made his pulse spike. "Emily." He let out a slow exhale before stepping out of the car. Her arms were crossed, her stance firm, her expression unreadable. "Are you following us?" Liam scoffed. "Don't flatter yourself. I was just passing through." Emily narrowed her eyes. "Right. And I suppose it's just a coincidence that you happened to pass by here of all places." Liam stayed silent, his jaw tightening. Emily's voice softened, but there was something in her tone that made him uneasy. "Did you see it?" His fingers twitched. "See what?" She lifted her chin slightly, her dark eyes burning into his. "Yourself. In him." Liam didn't move, didn't breathe, but something cold settled in his chest. Emily sighed and took a step closer. "When you get those results, do yourself a favor, Liam. Don't embarrass yourself by arguing with me." Then she turned away, walking toward Noah, who was already running toward her with a bright smile. Liam stood there, silent, the weight of her words pressing down on him. No, it couldn't be. But for the first time in his life, he was afraid that it was. Liam stared at the envelope on his desk. He hadn't opened it yet. His fingers tapped restlessly against the polished wood, his mind waging a war between logic and the gnawing feeling in his gut. He had delayed this long enough, with an impatient sigh. He tore the envelope open, his eyes scanning the neatly printed words on the page until they landed on the line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 99 to 109%. A sharp breath left his lips. The air in the office suddenly felt suffocating. Liam sank back into his chair, pressing his fingers to his temples. Noah was his son. Fuck. A knock on the door snapped him out of his daze. "Come in," he said, his voice rough. Emily stepped inside without hesitation, closing the door behind her. She didn't need to see the paper to know the truth. The certainty was already in her eyes. "Well?" she asked, arms crossed. Liam let out a humorless chuckle, running a hand down his face. "What do you want me to say, Emily?" She lifted her chin. "Say it out loud. Say that he's your son." Liam pushed his chair back and stood abruptly, his body coiled tight with frustration. "And what the hell do you expect me to do about it?" he snapped, his voice razor sharp. "You think I can just flip a switch and become a father overnight?" Emily didn't flinch. "No, Liam, I think you can stop acting like a coward." His nostrils flared, his blue eyes narrowing. "How much do you want?" Her face twisted in something between anger and disappointment. "Are you serious?" Liam leaned forward, placing both hands on his desk, his stare locked onto hers. "Let's cut the bullshit, Emily. Everything has a price. Just name yours." Emily let out a slow, bitter laugh. "You really are a bastard." The tension in the room crackled like fire. Liam watched as she stepped toward him, her scent wrapping around him like a cruel reminder of every moment they had shared before. She stopped when their bodies were inches apart. "You're so terrified of this, aren't you?" Liam's jaw ticked. "Careful, Emily." "No, you be careful, Liam." Her voice was lower now, her breath brushing against his skin. "Because one day, you're going to regret this." His fingers twitched at his sides. Because damn it, she was right. But instead of admitting it, he did what he always did. He got too close. His hand lifted, fingertips grazing her wrist, just enough to make her breath hitch. "You're still so easy to rile up," he murmured, his voice turning dangerously soft. Emily didn't move away, but she didn't fall for it either. Instead, she placed a hand flat against his chest and pushed. "You have two options, Liam. Write me a check and disappear like the selfish bastard I know you are, or prove me wrong." Liam clenched his jaw, his breath heavy, but he said nothing. And for the first time in years, he didn't have a single damn clue what to do next. Liam hadn't checked his phone all day, but he felt its vibration on his desk like an alarm he couldn't ignore. He knew who it was. He knew what it was about. And still he had let the messages pile up, each one from Emily, each one a reminder of the truth he hadn't figured out how to face yet, until she called. And for some damn reason, he answered. "You need to see him, Liam." There was no anger in her voice, no demand, just a quiet certainty that twisted something in his gut. He could have hung up, he could have made an excuse, but he didn't. 2 hours later, he was standing in front of a brownstone in Brooklyn, his knuckles tight before he finally knocked. Emily opened the door with a knowing look. Try not to screw this up. He didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, he followed her inside. And there he was. Noah sat on the living room floor, rolling a toy truck back and forth with a deep concentration that made Liam's stomach twist. He felt like a goddamn idiot just standing there. Then Noah looked up, and Liam forgot how to breathe. The boy's dark blue eyes studied him, head tilting slightly, in a way that felt too familiar. Emily walked over and crouched beside him. "Noah, this is a friend of mine. His name is Liam." Liam felt a cold wave rush through him at the words, "a friend." That's all he was right now. Noah blinked at him, then shrugged. "Hi." His voice was small but sure, like he had already decided Liam wasn't much of a big deal. Liam exhaled, forcing himself to relax his stance. "Hey, kid." Noah watched him for a second longer before going back to his truck. Liam couldn't stop staring. Emily sat down on the couch, motioning for him to do the same. He hesitated for half a second before lowering himself onto the cushions. Emily handed him a glass of water. He took it, but he barely noticed, because all he could focus on was Noah. On the way his little brow furrowed in concentration. On the way he kept glancing at Liam out of the corner of his eye, as if trying to figure him out. Down the worst part, Liam felt like the kid was already seeing straight through him, like he knew, like he had always known. And for the first time since opening that damn DNA test, Liam Carter didn't feel powerful. He just felt terrified. Noah was asleep. His soft, steady breathing filled the quiet apartment, a peaceful contrast to the storm brewing in the living room. Emily stood near the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Liam sat on the couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand that he hadn't touched. "So what happens now?" Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Liam exhaled sharply, setting the glass down with more force than necessary. "I don't know." Emily let out a dry laugh. "Not good enough." His jaw clenched. "What the hell do you want from me, Emily?" She took a slow step forward. "I want you to be a man, Liam." That struck deeper than it should have. His lips curled into a humorless smirk. "I already told you, I'll take care of everything financially." Emily slammed her palm against the counter. "He doesn't need your money, Liam. He needs a father." The words hit him harder than he expected, because he had no idea how to be that. And worse, he wasn't sure he wanted to be. Emily must have seen something flicker in his expression, because her posture shifted. "You have no idea how to do this, do you?" Liam stiffened. "Watch yourself, Emily." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "The truth makes you uncomfortable." Liam stood abruptly. Too close, too fast. Emily didn't move. The tension between them crackled like live wire. Her body was rigid, her breathing controlled, but her lips parted slightly, and Liam felt it like a goddamn trigger. "Still enjoy pushing my buttons," he murmured. Her throat bobbed slightly. "You're not that special." Liam chuckled darkly, leaning down just enough for his breath to graze her ear. Liar. A visible shiver ran through her, his fingers barely. Ghosted over her wrist, a feather-light touch that sent a charge straight up her spine. Emily sucked in a breath. His gaze dropped to her lips. He wanted her, damn it, he still wanted her. The desire between them wasn't dead. It was buried alive, clawing to the surface, dangerous and intoxicating. But just as his hand slid down her arm, Emily's eyes snapped back into focus. And she shoved him away. No, her voice was sharp, breathless. Liam's pulse roared in his ears. Emily straightened, her jaw tight. "I won't be your mistake again." Liam held her stare, his body tense, his breathing heavy. He didn't stop her as she turned and walked away. But the heat of her touch was still seared into his skin, and he hated how much he craved it. The storm outside raged, lightning slicing through the Manhattan skyline, rain hammering against the windows like impatient fists. Inside Emily's apartment, the tension was just as volatile. Liam stood near the doorway, his fists clenched, his breathing uneven. He should have left, he should have turned around, walked out, and let this whole thing fade into whatever mess it was becoming. But he didn't, because Emily was standing in the middle of the living room, her arms crossed over her chest, her dark eyes locked onto him with the kind of defiance that made his blood burn. "Why are you still here?" Her voice was quiet but laced with frustration. Liam exhaled slowly. "Good question." A humorless chuckle left her lips. "Typical. You show up, cause chaos, and then stand there like you don't know what the hell you're doing." Liam's jaw ticked, his body moving before his mind could stop him. He closed the space between them in two slow, deliberate steps. Too close. Emily inhaled sharply. Too late. "You always have something to say, don't you?" he murmured, his voice low, rough. Emily's lips parted slightly, her breath shaky. "And you always have to ruin everything." Liam smirked, the corner of his mouth curving in that damn way that always got to her. "You didn't seem to mind the last time." Her eyes darkened. That was a mistake. His head tilted, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "Say it again." Emily's fingers twitched at her sides. "Liam." He reached out slowly, brushing his knuckles against her jaw, a feather-light touch, a dangerous invitation. Her pulse jumped under his fingertips. And then he kissed her. The moment their lips met, it was like striking a match in a room filled with gasoline. Explosive, consuming, unstoppable. Emily's hands fisted into his shirt as she pulled him closer, her body arching into his like she had been starving for this. Liam groaned into her mouth, his grip tightening around her waist, lifting her slightly, pressing her against him as if he could burn the memory of her into his skin. The heat was unbearable, the tension unbearable. Everything between them was fire and fury. Emily gasped when his lips trailed down her neck, his teeth scraping lightly against her skin, before soothing the spot with his tongue. Her head fell back, her nails digging into his shoulders. God, Liam. He swallowed her words with another kiss, deeper, rougher, desperate. They barely made it to the bedroom before they crashed onto the bed, tangled in sheets and heat and years of unresolved desire. The storm outside howled louder, but inside, the only thing that mattered was the way they lost themselves in each other. The way they forgot everything else, because for tonight nothing else existed. Only them. Only this. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a golden hue across the sheets. Emily stirred first. The warmth of a body beside her made her chest tighten before she even opened her eyes. She already knew who it was. Liam. His arm was draped lazily over her waist, his breathing deep and steady. She blinked, willing herself to process the moment before reality crushed the remnants of whatever last night had been. She had let him in. Again. Her fingers twitched against the sheets, aching to trace the sharp lines of his back, to memorize the way his skin felt under her touch. But she knew better. She knew exactly how this would end. Carefully, she shifted, trying to slide out of bed without waking him. But before she could escape, Liam moved. His arm tightened around her, pulling her back against his chest. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was rough with sleep, lazy and far too dangerous. Emily sucked in a breath. "To start my day." Liam smirked against her skin, his lips brushing the bare curve of her shoulder. "Stay." Emily's pulse spiked. "Stay." A word Liam Carter never used, a word she didn't trust. She turned slightly, meeting his gaze. His blue eyes were half-lidded, but there was something else lurking beneath the haze of sleep, something that made her chest ache. But it wasn't real. She shook her head, pulling away from his grasp and sitting up. Liam frowned. "Emily, don't do this." Her voice came out more fragile than she wanted, so she cleared her throat. "Don't make this more than what it is." Liam sat up, his body radiating heat beside her. "And what exactly is it?" Emily turned her face away, refusing to meet his gaze, because if she did, she might break. "A mistake." The word hung in the air like a blade. Liam's body tensed, his expression closed off instantly, the warmth in his eyes snuffed out like a dying ember. And just like that, the Liam Carter she had spent the night with was gone. What remained was the man she knew too well, the one who ran before anything got too real. Without another word, he threw off the covers and stood, moving with the detached precision of a man who had already decided how this story would end. Emily didn't watch as he got dressed. She didn't stop him when he reached for his jacket. She just sat there, her hands gripping the sheets, waiting for the inevitable. Liam paused at the door. For a split second, she thought he might say something. But he didn't. He walked out without looking back. And as the door clicked shut, Emily squeezed her eyes shut, wishing it didn't hurt as much as it did. Liam drove through the city, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The streets of Manhattan blurred past him, the skyline glowing with the neon lights of a city that never slept. But his mind was stuck in that damn bedroom, in the way Emily had looked at him before saying the one word that should have meant nothing. "Same mistake." His jaw clenched. It wasn't like he had expected anything different. Wasn't this exactly what he wanted? Distance, detachment, a clean break. So why the hell did he feel like his chest was caving in? His phone vibrated on the seat next to him. He ignored it. Another vibration. He glanced down. Emily. "A message." "Noah asked about you." Liam swallowed hard. His fingers twitched against the wheel. No. He couldn't get pulled into this. So he put the phone face down and kept driving. Days later, Liam drowned himself in work. Surgeries, late nights at the hospital, business meetings that barely required his presence, whiskey, a different woman in his bed every night. None of it worked, because no matter what he did, he still saw Noah's face every time he closed his eyes. And worse, he saw Emily, the way her lips parted when he kissed her, the way her breath hitched when he touched her, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. It was driving him insane. And then one evening, as he left a long shift at the hospital, Emily was waiting for him. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, they cut right through him. "You should come see Noah." Liam exhaled through his nose, already shaking his head. "Emily, he's waiting for you." Her voice was softer than he expected, and for some reason, that made it worse. Liam rubbed a hand down his face. "You think this is easy for me?" The confession left his lips before he could stop it. Emily's gaze softened, just barely. "No, but you don't have to do it alone." The air between them was thick, heavy. She stepped closer, so close he could smell the faint trace of vanilla on her skin. "Stop running, Liam." His pulse roared in his ears, because for once he didn't want to run, but he didn't know how to stay. So he did the only thing he knew. He grabbed his jacket and walked past her without saying a word. Emily didn't follow him. And even though he didn't turn back, he knew he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The ringing of his phone jolted Liam awake. He squinted at the glowing screen, barely registering the late hour. 2:37 a.m. Emily. A cold sensation spread through his chest. He answered immediately. "What's wrong?" Her voice was shaky, breathless, scared. "It's Noah. I'm at the hospital. His fever won't go down." Liam was already pulling on a shirt, his heart pounding. "I'm on my way." No hesitation. No second guessing, just the raw, paralyzing fear gripping his throat. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and bad memories. Liam strode through the halls with a sharp focus, his body moving on instinct, but his mind stuck on one terrifying thought. What if he was too late? Then he saw her. Emily sat hunched in one of the chairs outside a hospital room, her elbows on her knees, her face buried in her hands. She looked up as he approached. Her eyes were red. Liam's stomach clenched. "Where is he?" Her voice was unsteady. "They're monitoring him. His fever was too high, but the doctors say he should respond to the treatment soon." She exhaled shakily, running a hand through her hair. "But Liam, I was so scared." Liam clenched his fists, because for the first time he realized she had been doing this alone, and that thought made him sick. Where is he now? Emily swallowed and nodded toward the hospital room. "He's sleeping." Liam didn't hesitate. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, and then he saw him, Noah. So small in that hospital bed, an IV in his arm, his little chest rising and falling. Too slowly, Liam felt his entire world tilt. Without thinking, he moved to the side of the bed and sat down. He reached out, hesitated, then gently wrapped his fingers around Noah's tiny hand. And for the first time in his life, Liam Carter was afraid of something real. He couldn't lose this, couldn't lose him, couldn't lose them. He tightened his grip, pressing his other hand against his forehead. Behind him, Emily stood in the doorway, watching in silence. And Liam knew he wasn't running anymore. The rhythmic beep of the hospital monitor filled the room. Liam hadn't let go of Noah's hand, not once. His thumb traced slow, absent-minded circles over the boy's small fingers, a foreign but undeniable warmth settling in his chest. Emily was still standing near the door, watching, waiting. Liam exhaled, his grip tightening slightly. "You don't have to stay, Liam." Her voice was soft, but he could hear the exhaustion beneath it. He finally looked up, and something inside him cracked. She wasn't challenging him this time. She wasn't pushing him away. She was just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of hoping for something that seemed impossible. Liam swallowed hard. "But I want to." Emily's lips parted slightly, her breath hitching. "What?" Liam straightened in his chair, dragging a hand down his face. "Let me talk." Emily nodded slowly, her arms tightening around herself. Liam took a breath. "My whole life, I thought keeping my distance meant control. That if I didn't get attached, I couldn't lose anything." He let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "And then you happened." Emily's fingers twitched against her sleeve. "Liam, no, let me finish." His voice was rough, unsteady. "From the moment I touched you, I knew I was fucked. I knew you weren't just some random woman I could forget the next morning." Her breath caught. Liam exhaled sharply. "And I hated it. Hated how much I wanted you, how much I—" His throat tightened. His gaze flickered to Noah. "How much I needed both of you." Emily pressed a hand against her lips, her shoulders trembling slightly. Liam stood slowly, walking toward her, close, but not touching. "Not yet. Tell me it's not too late." His voice was lower now. Rough around the edges, Emily blinked up at him, her eyes swimming with emotions she couldn't hide. She sucked in a breath. "Then stay." Liam reached out, finally cupping her face, and when she leaned into his touch, he knew he was never leaving again. Noah was better. His fever had broken, and his small, tired smile had been enough to ease the tight grip around Liam's chest. But Liam wasn't leaving, not this time. He stood on the balcony of Emily's apartment that evening, the city stretching out before him, the hum of traffic below a distant murmur. Inside, Emily moved quietly, tidying up, trying to act like she wasn't watching him, but he felt her. Like he always did. When he turned around, she was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You're still here." Liam smirked, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Told you I would be." She bit her lip, as if she wasn't sure if she could believe him. Liam's chest tightened. He pushed off the railing and crossed the space between them. Slow, deliberate. When he was close enough, he reached for her. His fingers traced the side of her face, sliding down to her jaw. Emily's breath hitched. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Liam." His thumb brushed over her lower lip, his voice rough, sincere. "Yes, I do." And then he kissed her. Not like before. Not like all the times they had let lust and anger consume them. This was different. It was deeper. Emily's hands slid up his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt as if she were holding onto something fragile. Liam groaned into her mouth, wrapping an arm around her waist, pulling her against him like he would never let her go. And he wouldn't. Not anymore. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the bedroom, their mouths still tangled, their breathing uneven. When he laid her down on the bed, he paused, studied her, watched the way her skin flushed under his gaze, the way her chest rose and fell with anticipation. He wanted to memorize everything, because this time it wasn't about need, it was about love. And when he lowered himself over her, he showed her exactly that, through every kiss, through every slow, reverent touch, through every whispered promise. When the night faded into dawn, Liam Carter wasn't the same man who had walked into her life 2 years ago, because now he finally knew what it meant to stay. The sun dipped low over the Hudson, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Liam sat on the patio of Emily's, brownstone, a glass of whiskey in his hand, untouched, because tonight he wasn't drinking to forget. He was watching. His gaze followed the small figure in the backyard, Noah laughing as he kicked a soccer ball, his tiny legs moving with clumsy determination. And then there was Emily, standing by the doorway, her arms crossed, her soft smile pulling at something deep in his chest. His family. 2 months. 2 months since the night he stayed. 2 months since he stopped running. Emily walked over, tilting her head at him. "You keep staring at me like that, Carter, and I might start thinking you're in love with me." Liam smirked. "Would that be so bad?" Emily rolled her eyes. "A little predictable, don't you think?" Liam set his glass down and pulled her onto his lap. She gasped, but he only tightened his hold, trapping her against him. "Nah, I think it's just about time I admitted it." Her lips parted slightly, but before she could respond, he kissed her, slow, deep, full of everything he hadn't been able to say before. When he pulled back, his voice dropped to a husky whisper. "I love you, Emily." Her fingers curled into his shirt, her eyes shining, and then she smirked. "Good, because I love you too." Liam let out a low chuckle before kissing her again. Behind them, Noah called out with his usual impatience, "Mom! Liam! You guys gonna kiss all night, or are we playing?" Emily laughed against Liam's lips. Liam groaned dramatically, but his chest felt lighter than ever. All right, kid. Let's do this. He stood, pulling Emily with him, and as he jogged toward Noah, he knew he had spent years running, years keeping his distance. But now he was exactly where he was meant to be. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't falling in love, it's allowing yourself to be loved. Liam spent his life running, believing that distance meant control, that emotions were a weakness. But in the end, love found him anyway. It forced him to face his fears, to fight for what truly mattered. What about you? Do you believe people can change for love? Would you take the risk or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And if this story made you feel, made you hold your breath, or even made your heart race, you won't want to miss what's next. There's another passionate, unforgettable romance waiting for you on the screen. Click now and dive into a new love story that will leave you wanting more.